For as long as I can remember, and that's over 2 decades, if not more, there have been talks by successive Nigerian governments about ending gas wastage. Now, experts in oil and gas, and indeed development economists, identify two paradoxical reasons why this action has become imperative. In the first instance, you only need to visit surrounding areas, especially in the host oil communities in the Niger Delta, to understand the spillover devastating impact of flared gas on almost all sectors of our economy, from environment, agricultural, health, water, and of course the livelihood of residents within those areas. On the other hand, the volume of flared gas, if properly channeled, could also improve the country's GDP by very, very wide margin. In simple terms, let's look at what gas flaring is. It is described as a process in which natural gas associated with petroleum extraction is burned off into the atmosphere. Now, instead of being channeled into other uses by alternative means, of course, that would require infrastructural development. Now, Nigeria has the 12th largest natural gas reserve in the world, according to available statistics, but much of it, as we already know, is wasted into the atmosphere. That's in the form of gas flaring. And there are over, at present, 170 gas flare points discovered across the country, with as much as over 800 million standard cubic feet of gas flared on a daily basis, and I stand to be corrected. Now, again, the latest statistics indicate that Nigeria is placed 7th on the global list of nations that are still flaring gas. Again, between 2016 and 2017, we understand that gas flared increased from 244.84 billion standard cubic feet to 287.59 standard cubic feet. That's the much of gas flared within 1 year. So how much is the price that Nigeria is paying? Huge, I'm told. Nigerians are worried that the country is burning money, huge sums of money that would have been channeled into developing critical areas of our economy. So how is Nigeria addressing gas flaring? Is the 2020 target date feasible? On Late Edition today, we examine combination of policy interventions that have been adopted by successive governments in gas production and ending gas flaring. I am Claire Adilabu Abdulrazak. Honorable Joseph Akinlaja is Chairman House Committee on Petroleum Resources Downstream. He was General Secretary of NUPENG, that's between 2000 and 2004. And I'm sure you also remember that Honorable Joseph Akinlaja was also Deputy President of the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, between 2000 and 2006. And I dare say that he is, of course, an expert, of course, when we talk about oil and gas. Now, Justice Derefaka is the Program Manager, Nigerian Gas Flare Commercialization Program, NGFCP. Now, this is domiciled in the Office of the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. The NGFCP is an initiative of the federal government to implement policies geared towards achieving the much sought after end to gas flare in the country. And as I said earlier on, justice is managed against safety and environmental issues for one of the oil companies in the Niger Delta, that's Shell Petroleum Development Company, SPDC. He's also worked with Shell Nigeria Exploration and Production Company, holds a bachelor's degree in marine engineering and 2 master's degrees, one in environmental management from University of Lagos, and of course the other in sustainable leadership from Cambridge University in the UK. Gentlemen, I am really honored to have both of you here on Late Edition this week. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Claire, for having me.
Yeah, Honorable, I'm starting with you. Okay, let me swap it, because Justice is, from the Niger Delta. He has been, with the oil companies. You've worked with the oil companies, so you must have, wide knowledge about this. In order for the viewer to appreciate the enormity of what we're discussing, that's gas flaring, I'd like us to put a face, to the issue. What exactly do women, we hear gas flaring? Can you just give us a vivid description of what it is?
All right. Thank you, Claire. Very briefly, gas flaring happens when, for instance, when an exploration production company go into a particular acreage they've been licensed to operate with the intent to explore for crude oil. And in the course of exploring for crude oil, they found some gas alongside it. So when they're exploring and getting out the crude oil, it comes along with gas. And that's why we call it associated gas. Now, that gas, for some reason, maybe perhaps the geology is not amenable for reinjection. So, and perhaps maybe there is no economic value for the producers.
When you talk about geology for reinjection, please would like you to, explain such terminology.
So what that means is that basically, globally, when you drill a particular oil well, what you can get for heavy crude oil, what you can get is around 40–50%. Now, to make the crude oil come out more, you need to increase the pressure. So you need to reinject gas to increase the pressure in the oil, in the well, to bring out enough crude oil. Yeah, so that's what, if the geology is not amenable, you can't do reinjection, and then perhaps they don't have need for it on site to generate electricity, and then they don't have a market for it, or most times, because of the terrain they are, there is no infrastructure to move that gas out. So in that case, they're left with no choice but to flare to the atmosphere, and that's what happened. And in other areas, in other parts, where producers try to use this gas is for gas lift. And so gas, what they do is that they reinject that gas into the annulus of a producing well. Now, this time it's not a reservoir well, a producing well, to as much as possible try to bleed the well to bring more crude oil on the surface.
So the red flame, because if you travel along within the Niger Delta, the oil producing areas, at some point you see red flame in the atmosphere that we see. How do we explain that? Is that the flare?
That is a flare that they don't have any use for. So the only way to get it out of their facility is to pass it through a flare stack and then emit it to the atmosphere.
Honorable Akinlaja, what's your understanding of that? Maybe from your end we'll be able to appreciate it even much simpler.
Well, he has described the process. Well, we look at the effect, It's an associated gas, which if left could cause explosion.
Okay.
Yeah, if left, yes. It has to be dispersed one way or the other. Okay. But technology made it possible for you to reinject that gas, that you don't flare to the atmosphere because of environmental pollution, heat generated that destroy aquatic and vegetation, as a side effect of such flare. So we look at the effect as an oil man myself. I travel extensively in the Niger Delta area where crude oil is produced and this flare takes place. I could see that some aged people, some skin is baked, with long-term effect.
Let's talk about the reinjection.
Yeah.
Yes, because you've just said something. Justice said oil companies in the process of exploration that do not have a need, to, of course, generate electricity or whatever, and do not have the capacity to reinject. You have talked about technology to reinject. Does it mean that the oil companies that flare gas do not have this technology to re-inject?
They do, but they consider the cost implication to them. And since Nigerian authority provided an alternative, they usually went for the alternative. And what is this alternative? Maybe you take 2 kobo per cubic that you flare. If you compare that cost with the cost of possessing the technology to reinject and preserve it there for future, you go for like water passes through part of least resistance, so that is what happened. They look at the economics of it.
The economics of it, Justice, most of the oil companies, of course, involved in the hazard are also into joint ventures, with NNPC, which of course holds the interest for Nigeria. Whose responsibility is it, to make available this technology to re-ingest, the excess gas?
Okay. Normally, when these fields are developed, that's what we call a field development plan that is approved by government regulatory authorities. So they profile different alternatives towards the associated gas. And once this is approved, that is what the producers run with. And the other bit, just like Honorable Joseph mentioned, they could inject the associated gas and then leave it there in the reservoir. That's of course sequestration, and then later they bring it back. But all of those are subject to approval by authorities. So the alternative, like he initially mentioned, is that the oil companies has to flare. And then, so when you flare, there is a regulation that says when you flare, you pay 10 naira, which 2-3 months ago was 10 naira, equivalent to 0.03 cents per thousand scope of gas that you flare in your oil mining lease or marginal field that you operate.
Now, flaring, the history of flaring, gas flaring, is as old as, the history of oil discovery in Nigeria itself. We understand as far back as, 50s.
1956.
Precisely, we've been flaring. So, can we, feel the enormity of the impact of gas flaring? Honorable Akinlaja started talking about the impact of the aged.
Yeah, we feel it. One is economic loss, heavy economic loss to the country, and two, the impact, I said it, on vegetation is incalculable, and also on aquatic life. There's definitely the fishes will migrate from those areas where the heat is much, and the people around this area rely more on aquatic life. So the impact is both economic, environmental, and also social. Yeah.
Justice, I know you come from, Okirika, you told me, in River State. Within that axis, if you're traveling from rivers, I know you're going to pass through Eleme. You have, gas. There's a bit of gas flaring around those areas, down Oyibo and all that. Just give us, let us have, a feel of what it is, that people who live within those surroundings go through, in terms of the heat, in terms of, the impact on their way of life?
Okay. Let me start by saying that overall, gas flaring is a tremendous waste. A waste of natural resources, even especially in this climate change perspective. And what gas flare does is that it contributes around 2% of total greenhouse gas emission globally. And the gas that we flare, just like Honorable Joseph mentioned, it is a waste of our economic resource. The gas that we flare can actually contribute positively to the global energy transition. which is the closest ally to renewables. Now, if you look at the Niger Delta terrain, why we say gas flaring must stop from a government position is that, according to a UNEP report, they said that close to 600,000 people die as a result of air pollution in Africa alone. And gas flare is a key air pollution in the Niger Delta communities. So if the UNEP says that 600,000 people die per year from air pollution, which means 600,000 people can die in a small community in Bayelsa called Polako from gas flare. That's the impact of it. Now, these people in the Niger, there was a study that was carried in Bayelsa that shows that it resulted into premature death, deterioration of buildings. It causes you struggle with your breathing and other health-related issues. So as a whole, it's detrimental, and it's not something that as a nation will be proud of. And again, this now contributes to the health budget of the federal government, including the state government. Because when people face these issues, that means they have to go to the hospital every other day. So who pays for the bill? And all of those. Now, the money that the producing companies pay as part of a gas flare penalty, is it commensurate with the health budget? So government looked at all of this and said this has to stop. So government came up with a policy position, which is the national gas policy that was approved by the Federal Executive Council last year, June 2017.
Just before you fast forward towards the present efforts, I like for us to really understand, because there have been various attempts to end gas flaring. We've moved from one deadline, to another deadline. Now we're having 2020 deadline. Honorable Akinlaja, do we just pay lip service to ending, gas flaring? Because when you talk about it, people just shrug and say, they have come again. So have we really had any well thought out, strategy targeted at ending gas flaring or converting, excess gas into productive use?
Well, the world is going the gas way, and we do not have a choice than to put down our leg now as government to ensure that deadlines are complied with. We ought to have complied with the deadlines, but attitudinal, Nigerian attitude to issues, it's not only in this gas flaring. If we leave things to the last minute, and we are faced with a fait accompli of having to shift the goalpost. In our lifestyle, if somebody say the deadline is October, the cycle is that they will still shift, and we do shift. But the irony of it, or the sad aspect of that, is that when we will now decide to go into it, become more expensive for us to do. That is the history of the gas development itself. When we take a policy that want to develop our gas, we start from Bonny LNG, Finima, and so on and so forth. We slow down. The other people take the market ahead of us. When we now come with the train too, then they become more expensive, and we are into so attitudinal. But it ought not to be so. And I believe that this 2020 deadline, or the deadline that is fixed now, government will they are serious now to put down their feet, and we should do it.
Yes, but we also want to look at past efforts.
I'm coming about past. When oil was discovered in 1956, it was not a hoe and cutlass affair. It was a technology that is beyond us. And definitely sometimes somebody who is stronger than you on an issue has a comparative advantage over you. So when and Nigeria was excited anyway that this is crude oil produced in this part of the country, and it's fetching money for us for economic development. So they have advantage, something like a small blackmail, if I put it in a blunt translate. So if they don't do it, do you have alternative? Can you do it yourself? And that is where we ought to have been thinking of can we, or how, if they don't, and we say go away, can you take over and take over effectively? So that might be responsible for allowing this shift, you know, to take place. It's a sort of,
but if that was if that was the earlier
thinking.
attitude,
Yes.
if that was the earlier attitude at the beginning,
before that, because that is probably what conditioned our making a law, you know, as an alternative that look very cheap, and an alternative for them as escape route. So that is my thinking.
Yes, but what I'm saying again is, gentlemen, if, as you say, that was the earlier attitude, okay, we want, you know, oil has been discovered in our country, okay, we want it explored, we want to, you know, of course, get the economic advantage of it, but of course, those that are coming have the comparative advantage. That was the earlier attitude. But flaring has been outlawed for the past 3 decades.
I know. I have told you,
yes,
it's outlawed, but there's alternative. If you flare, you pay penalty. And the penalty is cheap. It is outlawed, yes. But there's alternative. If it's complete outlaw, and there's no 10 naira, you know, to pay per flare, then then there's no escape route.
Are there specific laws, legislation that have been put in place, you know, towards the...
Yeah, there is.
Can you talk us through some of those?
That is the law that I told you made provision that if you flare 1 cubic feet of gas, you pay 10 naira. That's what I'm saying. It's contained in the law. The law says don't flare, yes, but if you have to, for whatever reason, whether you know you cannot use it to bring in more crude, and you cannot reject it, and you had to flare, you pay this. So
what was the wisdom in that, Justice? What was the wisdom? You want to end something, but you're providing another, you know, loophole. I mean, you're providing another avenue for the operators to, you know, to hide under. So what's the wisdom in?
Well, I wouldn't say government provide a wisdom.
Yes, because if you're saying stop, but if you must do, this is an alternative. What's the wisdom in
for
such
any
a law?
reason that you have to flare? So that starts like as a punitive measure, but it's not punitive enough. That's the point. And
it's not even punitive.
Yes, well,
it's not punitive. You are providing an alternative.
So just to give us some bit of a perspective, yes, it's been there as a problem that has been bedeviling the country, and in particular the Niger Delta. And one key thing about this issue is that gas fire knows no boundary. It doesn't know the rich or the poor. It doesn't know the old or the young. It cuts across board. Now, so successive government have tried to make efforts to reduce gas fire or to bring it to as low as reasonably practicable. And in the past decade, we've made some progress that we've done at least close to 70%. And so we can give some credit to the NNPC and the joint venture partners, the oil companies. But the volume of gas fire is still worrisome. Worrisome in the sense that last year we flared about, per day, we flare 888 million scoff. I saw in your initial intro, you mentioned that number. It's actually 888 million scoff per day. Now, if you look at that dual of 2017, it was around 324 BCF of gas that were flared. In terms of valuation, economic valuation, is around $1 billion US. Now, the emission, the 22 million tons CO2 that we emit, if we take it to the carbon market, that gives us 500 million US. So let me come back. What we found out when we came on board to say, why has
Can I interrupt you? Let me interrupt you. So when we come back after the short break, we want to go on a short break now. You will tell us what you have found out.
Right.
All right. This is Late Edition, and we're looking at combination of policy interventions in government's efforts to end gas flaring and, of course, channel it into productive economic advantage. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Late Edition. Today we're looking at combination of policy interventions in government's efforts to end gas flaring and channel it into productive economic advantage. And Honorable Joseph Akinlaja, Chairman, House Committee on Petroleum Resources Downstream, as well as Justice Derefaka, Programs Manager, Nigeria Gas Flare Commercialization Program, NGFCP, are my two guests. Gentlemen, thank you once again for joining me for this discussion. Justice, yes, I paused you at the point where you were talking about your findings. Okay. Yes, can you continue?
All right. So, like I did mention, there has been some bit of improvement, up to 70% decline, as opposed to where we were with respect to gas flaring in the country. And that's some credit that we can give to the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and, of course, the oil and gas producing companies. But even at that,
in terms of 70% decline, what does that amount to in terms of the number of
decline in the sense that we were number 2 in the world of gas flare nations, and then we moved to number 5. Now we are number 7 in the League of Gas Flare Nations. And so we looked at all of these issues and say, how can we move out of this League of Gas Flare Nations? Because that's not the league we want to be. Just like in a typical football league, people want to be number 1, but we want to be out of that league. And so government came up with some intervention to say, we need to come up with policy commitment. And then on top of that, this government is one administration that has bitten the bullet to say gas flaring has to stop in our oil and gas fields.
How many let's be exact. In my introduction, I mentioned an approximation of the number of gas flare points we have across the country. Do we have the exact number? How many gas flare points and how much, is each of these areas, flaring?
Okay, so permit me to give you some bit of a background. Yeah. I'll come from a global perspective, then I'll hit it on what Nigeria has. Globally, there are 16,000 gas flare locations, 16,000 in 90 countries, including this one we're living in. And in those 16,000 locations, we flare around 145 to 150 billion cubic meters of gas annually. Now, if you convert that, that can generate 750 billion kilowatts of electricity that can power the entire African continent annually, but we waste it. In terms of climate change impact, we emit close to 350 to 400 million tons of CO2 in this climate change issue that we're talking about. And in terms of valuation, it's around $10 billion US on the gas that will flare, and the CO2 emission credit is around $6 billion at $15. Now, coming back to Nigeria where we live, we have, as of today, by our records, we did some scrubbing. Now we developed a new template called the Detailed Information Request, which we developed with our development partners in the NGFCP. So the World Bank, the USAID, and the United Kingdom DFID Foster organizations. And then we work with DPRO, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources as well, and send it to the producers. So initially it was 140, 150 flare sites, but today, on record, we have 178 gas flare locations in the Niger Delta. And these are oil and gas exploration and production locations. But if you use satellite will give you a different number. And this is why. So if you use satellite, the satellite will pick those illegal bunkering sites as flare locations. So then it now gets to around 220, 230. But for typical E&P gas flare locations, as on record, it's 178. But when we looked at the projections on the different locations and oil fields, it will get to 188 by the time we're asking all the producers, again in line with the new regulations, to send in data. We're looking to having 188 gas flare locations spread across the Niger Delta, onshore, swamp, deep water, and shallow water locations.
Okay, now let us look at, zooming into this policy combination. Right. Of which the Nigerian commercialization program is one of, is a platform. Going by the nomenclature, is it merely, is it fundamentally tailored to generate revenue?
Okay, I won't take it from that end.
Yes, because
I understand your question,
flare
but
commercialization
Nigerian Gas Flare Commercialization Program. So this is a program designed by the federal government to implement federal government policy objectives to ensure gas flare elimination in an oil field in the 2-3 year term to bring in multiplier developmental outcomes for the country and for the Niger Delta. So what gave birth to the NGFCP is that Mr. President Muhammad Buhari was at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris in 2015 called the COP21. Now at COP21 he made a commitment that he will include gas flaring and he will reduce greenhouse gas, looking at all sectors of the economy. So he made a committal statement at international level. And in our international national determined contribution, gas flaring is one of it. Now, Mr. President came back to the country and ratified that agreement to demonstrate that he's serious about this. And then the ministry, the director of the ministry, of course, you know, he's a petroleum minister, and then the ministry under the Honorable Minister for State, Dr. Ibe Kachiku, we formulated the national gas policy, which was approved by Mr. President. Now, in that national gas policy, Chapter 6, Section 6.4, page 60 to 64, talks about gas flaring reduction. So government said they will now make sure that there's gas capture utilization, and they work with industry, development partners, gas flare out capture technology, and investors. So that gave birth to the NGFCP. Now, there's one thing to come up with a policy, and there's another thing to implement it. And so, again, like you asked previously, why have this thing lingered so long? Implementation is a problem. A structure to implement it. So the framework is the national gas policy, plus the 7 big wins of the petroleum sector. Big win number 3 is gas revolution. And inside the gas revolution, you have gas flare reduction in it. So after that, then the president, the ministry now established the Nigerian gas flare commercialization program, which was approved by the Federal Executive Council. Now, with this program, so what this program is doing, we had 6 key fundamental principles that guide the implementation of the NGFCP. Number 1, it's not about revenue, it's gas flare must be reduced. That's the number 1 fundamental principle. Number 2, it must benefit the Niger Delta community. Number 3, it must positively impact the Nigerian economy. Number 4, the program must be market-driven. Number 5, it is going to be bankable to investors and lenders. And then number 6, it must not have adverse effect on the exploration and production of the producers. So what is government trying to do with NGFCP? What is it all about? In the simple layman term.
Please, I need to bring in Honorable, you're also aware of this commercialization program.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, from the legislative point of view?
Well, we got their input into the effort that we're trying to make in this 8th National Assembly on the petroleum industry bill, especially the fiscal bill, which will amend the Petroleum Act and all these acts, and especially will amend that act, which I told you, on gas, development generally, the part of which is concerned gas flaring. So we got their input, the input of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and other stakeholders too, to ensure that the law, which has been on, the process that has been on for almost 17 years, is concluded, before the end of our term in this, to address this. But in the main, this commercialization policy, the implementation is very key, because my committee and the Committee on Gas and Upstream were taken through by the Honorable Minister of State, Ibe Kachiku, in this policy, a 7-win, quick win with number 3, concern this establishment of this policy, commercialization of the gas flare in the Nigeria petroleum industry.
You just talked about petroleum industry, and the concern of a lot of oil and gas watchers, are that we haven't, the petroleum industry governance bill stay pending. Still pending, isn't it?
For assent.
For assent. It's still not law.
Yeah.
So, and that is what is required to, of course, provide, the incentives and, spur on these measures.
No.
If you allow me comment,
yes.
That's okay.
Yeah, if you allow me
Maybe
comment.
after.
Okay, let the honourable, yes, before you comment.
It was passed speedily by us, the Senate, the National Assembly, and sent to Mr. President, where he sent it back for, because of some concern, and we have addressed that concern. So anytime from now, we believe it to be signed into law. So I do not have any fear, that about the governance bill. This is a gamut of interest is involved in this matter, and that is why it has not been possible, for all the time. But now all these interests have been harmonized, and the Senate President and the Speaker have taken it as a challenge that this industry is too important to our economy than to toy with it because of conflict of interest. So
the reality is that it is still not law in this country. That's the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. It's still not law.
Okay.
Your target is 2020. Just approximately 2 years from now.
2 years from now.
Yes.
So
is that feasible?
Which is why I want to make
Yes.
some form of, give you some information as opposed to the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. So the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill will not affect the timeline which the federal government has committed to 2020 to eliminate gas flaring to as low as reasonably practicable. So this is it. There is an existing Petroleum Act.
yes.
So if you look at Section 9 and Section 11 of the Petroleum Act, it empowers the Petroleum Minister in the interest of the public to come up with regulations. And paragraph 35B, first schedule 1 of that Petroleum Act says federal government can take flares at no cost and without payment of royalty. So kudos and some credit to the crafters of this Petroleum Act. Apparently they know that there will come a time that over time, if oil producing companies keep shifting the goalposts, government will step in. And that's the intervention we're talking about. Government has stepped in to say, okay, I'm going to make this provision now to say all oil companies, cease and desist and whatever you're doing with the gas fire, we're taking it and we're giving it to competent third parties. And that's what the NGSP is all about.
Third parties now, gas licenses?
Competent third parties that have they have technical background, they have the financial background, and they have proven project development experience, and they have technologies that are in commercial applications. So we don't want them to bring in technology that is just no cure, no pay kind of technology. This must be proven, they must be tested in other parts of the world. And we have close to about 40 of them that we've scrubbed with the World Bank that's on the NGSCP website. So for those, for purpose of our listeners, if you go to www...
we're gonna give you an invoice if you say that.
Okay. I thought we're trying to enlighten the public to know what the government is doing in that regard. So that is it. So we're inviting competent third parties to take this gas that is said to have been flared and convert them to market products and then sell them at their own price. Now, this is what will happen. We will now pass them through competitive bidding process. Again, going by the body language of Mr. President to show transparency and demonstrate openness. Everybody will compete competitively, and we'll come up with a set of criteria to see if those that are serious, and of course, they will meet up the requirement. Why we're doing this is that we're introducing third parties that, to some extent, will make sure that they match with the standards of the exploration and production companies, and of course, meet up with the guidelines and standards of the Department of Petroleum Resources.
These third parties, I'd like you to put a name.
Yes.
Are they off-takers?
So these are investors. So what these investors, third party will do is that they will now come up with the technology and harness the flare gas. So the end product will not go to off-takers.
Okay.
The buyers.
Okay. I still don't understand. My understanding is, are we doing the same, strategy adopted in power privatization, where you have, of course, the DISCOs and the GENCOs?
Well, you can say that, more like it. So, but what these other party investors and technology providers are doing, that they're coming with their own funds. And by the way, you asked a question.
Isn't that the same way we went? Honorable Akinlaja?
Yeah.
That was the same way we went with the DISCOs.
That was the way we went. We generate We now give it to transmission give it to
yes,
Genco, I mean the distributor.
So this third party investors are taking flare gas now.
Now this one will take flare gas and now
wasted.
sell it to
So it's like waste to wealth. So that waste, instead of wasting it, they harness it. We're using different technologies. So those technologies, at the end of the day, what these investors will come up with will be liquefied petroleum gas, compressed natural gas, chemicals, fertilizers, including other chemicals for plastics.
What happens where they fail? Because again, if we follow the template of power.
If you allow me, you obstructed me what I was saying. So I'm trying to give you a background of the DNA of the NGFCP.
We need to be fast because
that's what I was trying to work to give us. So what we now did was we now came up with a new regulation, which is why I said that the PIGB would not impact on the gas flare out timeline. We came up with a new regulation called the Flare Gas Prevention of Waste and Pollution Regulations 2018, made pursuant to the Petroleum Act and the Associated Gas Reinjection Act. And so what we now did with that regulation is to make sure that we look at it from a legal, technical, commercial, and quality from a developmental standpoint, that government is going to take this flare gas and give to third parties. And then to de-incentivize producers, which is again captured in the National Gas Policy in Chapter 6, that will increase the flare penalty. So the flare penalty up until 2.5 months, 3 months ago was 10 naira per thousand scope of gas. Now we've increased it to $2 per thousand scope for those producing more than 10,000 barrels of crude oil per day, and 50 cents for those producing less than 10,000 barrels of crude oil per day, per thousand scope of gas.
So let me pause you and bring in Honorable Akinlaja. What does that translate in terms of the economy and ending, gas flare?
Well, if the policy enunciated is implemented, and the law that we're talking about come to back it up, Nigeria is going to earn more from the gas that is being flared. Now the gas is tapped by these companies and now sold. There's value now added. I mean, there's value added now in the gas that we flare, and then the economy will benefit from it.
Yes. In terms of the $2 increase, fine penalty increase, what does that mean? I mean, the average Nigerian would want to know, what does that translate for us?
It's $2 times 800
so per day. What that means is that what we're doing, again, like I did mention with the principle, is the intent is not to generate revenue for government. So the penalty is to de-incentivize producers from the continuous gas flare practice.
How much is that? When you convert it, how much is that?
So when you convert it,
compared to what they're making?
By last year data, it's around $1 billion US, around 550, 570 million US dollars. And that's a lot. Now, again, by the time this third-party project come up to take this flare, the gas will dwindle, it will decline, and then we'll have a baseline as a result of the regulation to say producers must give us accurate flare data for us to give to third-party investors, because these investors they need to have investment-grade data that they can take to the bank. They can't just bring their own money and then they're not getting this data. So the regulations capture that as well. Now, this is what will happen. By the time they are taking these flares from producers, they themselves should not flare. So the Department of Petroleum Resources came up with guidelines. So projects, when you're taking this flare, the intent is to stop flaring as much as low as reasonably practicable. You should not flare. If you flare, this is how much you will pay. And by the way, to make sure that this program succeeds, we make the gas flare price 0.25 cents to attract investors.
So we in the few minutes that we've got to go, I'd like you to address two issues, because the same issues have applied in the previous measures of fine, in imposing fines. Of course, again, deductibles and alternative. Now, this measure, does it eliminate these issues of tax deductibles and having alternative?
Well, the effort we are putting into in the National Assembly, the new law we prevent deductibles, because it's like a punishment on the right hand and then ameliorating on the left.
Okay.
If you say pay 25 cents per cubic meter of your flare, and you say it's tax deductible, and that is double jeopardy for the country in terms of recovery, then there's no punishment. But like he said, our own intention is that we should prevent gas flaring, because apart from getting money from it, money is for man, not man for money. The environmental impact of the gas flare is much more devastating than the income that we earn from punishment.
Okay, so
the law will eliminate that.
Okay. Finally, you talked about you have given parameters. You know, $2 penalty per 1,000 standard cubic meters of gas flared. How do you determine that? Considering the fact, of course, we hear cooked up, you know, data from these oil companies. DPR doesn't even have, you know, the capacity to monitor, you know, data that is given to them. What they have is outsourced.
Very good. So, a very good question, and that is why I was trying to say that this regulation has addressed all of those. So the regulation now made it mandatory for producers to install meters. It's an obligation for them to install meters, including the projects, these third parties that are coming, so that we have these records on ground, and then it will not show the number of volumes, the gas that you flare, and then you make the payment. Now, apart from that, it gives us a baseline to know our emission credit, where we can take to the carbon market. So what I've not told you was that from the outset, NNPC, DPRO, Ministry of Petroleum were on ground to design the NGFCP. Now, as we progress along at the implementation phase, NNPC's Renewable Energy Department will collectivize the flare data and take it to the emission credit to do that. Then another agency of government will now sign the gases agreement with the project third parties. Now, the other bit again that we've done to make sure that this program succeed is that we've come up with guidelines. And that's one good thing the Department of Petroleum Resources, DPRO, is doing. There are 4 key guidelines that will frame the implementation of the regulations.
Okay, let me bring Honorable Akinlaja, your last question. Some have also suggested one way of ending gas flaring is by outsourcing monitoring of the, you know, excess gas or excesses of operators, you know, to local communities.
Well, outsourcing, yes, but it must be outsourced to those who have the means and the technology. And the competence, you see, where to place the meter itself is an issue. Like you said, there's always issues with quantity of crude oil produced and transmitted. So in gas too, it's not unlikely that it can happen, but competence is the watchword.
So finally, from both of you, in just one word, is this solution we're looking for? Is 2020 feasible to end gas flaring, or are we going to shift the goalpost again? Justice, quickly.
Okay.
Well, with the way we've designed the program, yes, it's feasible, but I need to mention that not all the gas flare locations will be harnessed.
Thank you. Honorable Akinlaja.
I'm saying it should be feasible, but from our experience, it's a problem.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for coming. It is a problem. It is feasible, but it is a problem. Implementation is key. Honorable Joseph Akinlaja, Chairman, House Committee on Petroleum Resources Downstream, and Justice Derefaka, Program Manager, Nigerian Gas Flare Commercialization Program, NGFCP. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me for this discussion.
Thank you.
For this week on Late Edition, I am Claire Delabo Abdulrazak. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.